Hello, my name's Kevin, this is Dirty 20 Gaming, and this time we're talking about Deadlands, the 20th Anniversary Edition. Why this edition when there are newer editions on the market? Well, basically because this is the one I know, so I'd rather talk about it. For those of you that don't know what Deadlands is, it is a game of gunslingers, steampunk, and magic. All of it set in the alternate reality of the wild, wild, weird West. One of the reasons I'm doing this is because the mechanics are very, very different in Deadlands than they are from a game like D&D 5e that most of us are used to. And one of the things I want to avoid is just straight transposition. I don't want to just say, in Deadlands, this is like that part of D&D. But right here at the start, it kind of makes sense to do that. The reason I say this is because characters in Deadlands have traits and aptitudes. These directly relate to stats and skills in 5e. So traits are your innate strengths and weaknesses, and aptitudes are based on those traits. And the mechanic here is really interesting. The short version of this is that traits tell you what size of die to roll and how many of them to roll for a straight check in that field. Aptitudes tell you how many dice to roll for a very specific activity. So let me give you an example. If a character has a deftness trait, that means that they would roll 3d10s when they're making a straight deftness check, and they have a pistol shooting aptitude of 4, that means when they shoot something, they roll 4d10. So you see, the number of dice that you roll is based on the aptitude. The type of dice you roll is based on the trait that aptitude is based on. It's slightly more complex than that, but those are the basics, and those are all you need to know for now. So now you've rolled your 4d10 for shooting, but you don't add these dice up. There's a target number. For an average difficulty, it's 5 in most cases. And it is the highest single roll that you roll is the only one that counts. But dice explode in this game. In the in-game vernacular for that is getting an ace. And what that means is if you roll the maximum number on any die, you roll it again and add. This is important because in this game, it's not just if you succeed, but it also matters how much you succeed by. Oh, and one other thing. Things can go horribly wrong. If you ever roll a majority of your dice as ones, you have gone bust in the in-game vernacular, and terrible, horrible things are about to happen to you. So character creation always is a good place to start. When you're building characters in Deadlands, the trick is that your traits are based on playing cards that you draw from a deck, and aptitudes are purchased with points based on traits. Then things like your pace, which is your movement, and your wind, we'll talk about that more later, are also calculated based on other traits. There's also hindrances and edges. They're quite common in many games, so I won't go into those too much. Basically, I'll just say that they can add and subtract skill points that you can use to improve your character over time. They can also be used if you play your hindrances or your edges very well, if you role play them exceptionally. Your marshal, which is the game master in this game, can reward you with poker chips. We'll talk more about those a little bit later too. Everybody wants to know about combat, so let's talk about combat. Combat is interesting. It starts with a quickness roll with the target number of 5. Again, it's not just if you succeed, but how much you succeed by. The more you succeed by, the more cards you are dealt. And then the round itself has 13 sections, starting with aces, going down to kings, queens, jacks, and all the way down to deuces. And every time one of the cards in your hands comes up, you get to take an action. Again, there's some twists on this, but that's the basics. Now, I talked about poker chips before. In-game, they're referred to as fate chips, and they do a number of different things. They're usable in-game, or they can be saved and used between games to improve your traits and aptitudes. So in short, they can be used to improve a roll, a trait or aptitude roll in game. They can be used to cancel wounds at the moment that those wounds are taken. And they can also, if you save them, they can be traded for bounty points, which are used to improve your character between sessions. Now, of course, if you're talking about combat, you have to talk about wounds and damage. In this game, damage is fairly simple. Pretty much every ranged weapon does fixed damage. So a pistol will do 3d6 damage. And in this case, you do add those dice together to create your total damage, but they still explode, so you still re-roll aces, so you can get some huge damage if you're very lucky. Melee weapons are a little different. The damage there is based on your strength plus the weapon that you're using. And then there's a couple places on your body where if you get hit, you take extra damage dice. They're sort of the critical areas of your anatomy that you definitely don't want to get hit in. But quickly back to damage. That damage that we talked about before, that number, is divided by your size. And for a typical person in this game, your size is 6. And that equals the number of wounds that you take. I know there's more math in this than there is in D&D, but there's more math in most of these RPGs than there is in D&D. So again, your damage that you take and divided by your size, which is usually 6, equals the number of wounds that you take. And there are hit locations in this game, so the wounds get spread around your body. It's your worst wound, no matter where it is, it's your worst wound that attaches modifiers to all your future rolls and makes things harder to do. You can also be temporarily stunned when you take wounds. This game is different because there's kind of 2 different types of damage. There's the wounds that we just talked about, and then there's something else called wind. And every time you take a wound, you also roll wind damage, and aces re-roll and add in this too. Being reduced to 0 wind makes you useless. You're not necessarily unconscious, you're not necessarily dying, but you've been knocked out of the fight until you're healed. One thing you'll notice very quickly playing or watching this game is it's usually wind that puts you out of a fight. It's not usually wounds, because it takes 5 wounds on each portion of your body to completely debilitate that limb or that head or whatever else it is that's getting shot repeatedly. 2 or 3 lucky wind rolls can knock you out of a fight when you've only got 2 or 3 total wounds on your body. It really depends on the dice. Now, one more thing about wounds. They take time to heal in this game, even with magical help. So the penalties applied by your worst wound can last for days. It fades over time, but it can last and have a long-term effect on your survivability. I mentioned machines and magic earlier. I'll quickly touch on them here. There are several types of magic in this game. There's a sort of a traditional caster that is referred to as a hucksters. There are blessed and shamans who are motivated more by religious sources. And you can play a tinkerer who builds and designs creations, creatures, mechanical creatures, and machinery. You can even become undead and continue playing as a character in Deadlands. All of these archetypes use a very similar mechanic, and it's based on poker hands. So you see behind me, there's a couple of decks on the screen there. One is for me, the marshal. The other one is for the players. And every time they try and cast a spell or build a creation or cast a spell, I guess, is really the only 2 options. Every time they do that, they draw a number of cards from the deck, depending on how well they rolled, and they have to build a poker hand out of it. The better that hand is, the better the result of the magic is. And yes, this means if you don't get a good poker hand, your spell could fail completely. There's a lot more to this game. I mean, the basic rule book is 411 pages long, and that doesn't include the extra text for each of the magical classes and a few other ones. But this should at least let you understand what you're seeing if you should ever find yourself watching a game of Deadlands, or if you're lucky enough to be playing in one, you'll at least have a basic understanding of what's going on around you. Speaking of watching people play Deadlands, keep your eyes peeled on our Twitch channel and our YouTube channel, information below in the box, for an upcoming Deadlands adventure featuring players from both the Too Many Warlocks and the Mercenaries of Mischief games, run on those channels on a regular basis, and with me as the game master, or marshal, if you will. So as always, thanks for listening, and until next time, game creatively. Bye.